Right, so we've got three amazing speakers today. So we've got Ali Hunter, who's Development Director at Be More Human. We've got Moira Bain, who's Chief Executive of Housing Options Scotland, and Bruce Daisley, who is Workplace Culture Expert and best-selling author. So Bruce's book we've used in our digital leadership programme that we run with Charities Chief Execs. Maddie is holding a copy of it just now. Really, really good book if you've not read it, and really, Bruce will talk about it, I'm sure, but really practical steps that you can take in your organisation, cuts out all the waffle and really gets to the kind of core of what makes workplace culture. So we're going to start with Ali, then we'll hear from Moira, and then finally we're going to hear from Bruce. So I'll hand you over to Ali Hunter just now.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Good afternoon, colleagues. So Be More Human, we help individuals, teams, and communities to flourish. What we try and do is scrape up some of the best ideas that are evidence-based from behavioural science, positive and social psychology, and then blend that with a kind of no-nonsense, plain English approach to helping people and organisations be the best they can be. We do that through kick-ass training, learning development, programme design and delivery. Obviously, lots of that nowadays is happening online. And we have one aim, and that, I guess, is just to be more human. So the name is there. So humans, I guess we are, the most incredibly powerful, resilient, robust and complex machines that are around on this planet. But that being said, we live in an environment, the environment we live in has a massive effect on us. So it can build us or break us. So there's a brilliant example of that in Johann Hari's work. If any of you have seen it on Lost Connections, I'll just pop a TED talk in the chat function there. So I'll do that as we go. And don't worry, I'm going to chuck out loads of stuff and loads of practical stuff to watch later and pick up. If you come to my Twitter page later, I'll have a full page of all the links and ideas that I've got. So if you're not following 100%, don't worry, it'll be there by 5 o'clock. So that Lost Connections, brilliant example of how the world is actually stripping us of those core elements that we need to survive and to thrive, and it breaks that down. So on that cheery note, I'll segue nicely into the topic of the quote. So the forefather of Appreciative Inquiry is a fellow called David Cooper. He says that culture is formed in the crucible of crisis. It feels very dramatic and now. But I guess we're at a crossroads. We are at a point where we've kind of figured out a lot about the human condition, particularly in the last 20 years. And we've kind of figured out that it's killing us and it's killing our planet, which is really negative for somebody that considers himself to be an optimist. That crossroads we're at right now, we're going to go two ways from this. You and your organisations, you're going to go back to a point where you're going to expend time and energy trying to get back to normal, and by that I mean almost like recreating what we know. Some of us will take this opportunity to shift our expectations of ourselves and our relationships and our workplaces, and try and create a future maybe that's a bit more human, that builds us up a bit more than it breaks us down. The work we do at Be More Human operationalises that shift. And tries to make that practically easy for us to build ourselves up and build our organisations up. So I'm going to share two thoughts on how we do that, and then three practical things that we can do about that. So I've got about less than 5 minutes left to do that. So I will speak quickly. First thing, it's really, really critical to understand how human beings predict and mobilise behaviour, how it is that we behave. What are the 4 things that we really, really need to know about how humans behave? 1, we always do what's easiest. We do that because it's bred into us. We do whatever we can to save calories because we don't really know where those next set of calories are coming from. That's still part of us over time that's developed. So we do what's easiest. The path of least resistance is real. That's why TV remotes are so popular, because we can't get up and change TV. We just hit a button. We save calories. So that's number 1 in terms of how we mobilise human behaviour. We've got to do what's easiest for the people we're working with. 2 is we're social animals, right? We're built to find a tribe and keep a tribe. Everything that we do is about impressing that tribe or trying to get into that tribe or at least avoiding embarrassment. So we're social animals. So we must consider that when we're thinking about culture and well-being. How do we work that one out? Control. We crave self-control as human beings. So when somebody says there is no self-control for you here, instinctively at some level we push back against that. We crave control, but we push back against it. And lastly, we absolutely are rubbish at self-control. We've never known more about health and fitness and well-being. However, we are the most unhealthy, unfittest, heavily medicated and unhappy generation that's ever walked planet Earth. Again, another beautifully happy and optimistic quote from me there. So we're absolutely terrible at self-control. The whole joy now, pay later thing, we've got that absolutely and utterly nailed. So those are the 4 bits that we really have to think about when it comes to mobilising our behaviour as human beings, because our behaviour is a kind of crucial part of who we are and how we interact with the world. 2 other wee bits around behaviour change. Our ability to mobilise behaviour is driven by 2 things. 1, relationships, and 2, resilience. Okay, relationships give us safety. They're the basic sign of how we belong to a tribe and that we're not alone. Chronic loneliness is an epidemic that we're living through right now, and I'm not talking COVID times, I'm talking pre-COVID times. Just to let you know that the one thing about loneliness, chronic loneliness particularly, so we're not measuring how many relationships we have, it's the quality of the relationships that we have. If you do not have quality relationships in your life, that loneliness is associated with significant increase in greater risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke. It contributes to a more rapid progression of Alzheimer's and suppresses the function of our immune system. Relationships are critical. There's some really, really interesting stuff around this, some brilliant research being done that I'll pop in the chat now from the Joe Cox Foundation on loneliness. It's really, really, really good. So, takeaway point, we absolutely must build relationships. What we're doing right now, how we're recovering, how we're functioning right now, we've got to be building relationships in what we do. If you're not doing that now, stop what you're doing, start building some relationships, and then everything else will follow on after that. The second bit I mentioned there was resilience. Massively overused term, but massively misunderstood. I define resilience as adapting well in the face of adversity or significant threats and moving forwards. Resilience is made up of 7 parts. The most important, I'll only talk about a couple of them. 1, the most important thing of resilience for me, and that comes out in the analysis on well-being, is self-efficacy. So it's the idea of what I do today impacts what happens to me tomorrow. So if I have a strong sense of self-efficacy, that will really keep my ability to make better decisions today in check, because I know it will have an impact on me tomorrow. If you're working with younger people, you're going to have things that are exacerbated by adolescence, things like emotional regulation, impulse control. And then the last thing on that I mentioned is actually the basic one is asking for help. Resilient people ask for help. So I'll pop the 7 in the handout that I've got later, just to avoid boring people too much right now. Last bit on resilience is it's not fixed. Resilience can grow, it can be coached. Okay, our resilience, our ability to bounce back is not fixed. We can grow it. Okay, practical takeaways. Number 1, strengths. This idea of the sort of psychology of personality has grown massively in the last 2 decades with some really critical, profound findings. Personality and character can change for the better or for the worse, depending on the environment that we're in. That's the same for life, it's the same for work, it's the same wherever we are. Our environment makes us better or worse in terms of our strengths. So sooner or later, if we focus on negative stuff, we're going to see the world through negative eyes. If we focus on positive things and growth, then sooner or later we're going to start to see the world as at promise rather than at risk. So there is a brilliant institute, not-for-profit institute called the Character Institute. They've been researching this stuff for 20 odd years now. There's a brilliant 8-minute video that I've just popped in the chat there. Watch that, have a cup of tea later, watch that 8 minutes. so succinct and brilliantly introduces this idea of strengths and how we can use strengths. And then when you've done that, I'll pop the other link in the box. You can take a free via character strengths test to identify what are your inherent natural strengths that you can bring to the table, that you can utilize in your work, your personal life, your hobbies, to build relationships. So you're starting that relationship or that journey from a point of strength. I talk to my young sons about starting the day 1-0 up. If you start the day 1-0 up, you're good. They love football, and I'm trying to get them to make their beds while I'm encouraging them to start the day 1-0 up. Make your bed, you start the day 1-0 up. They've achieved a task before they even leave their room in the morning. And that sets their mindset for the day. Then we're on to a good thing. It doesn't work, by the way, with them, but practice and persistence, we're going to go on. I'm going to crack on with that. The last bit on strengths kind of moves into well-being. Like we can kind of measure strengths and identify our own strengths, there's some brilliant tools out there now that are well-being tools that we can use to get a gauge on where we might be. One that I want to highlight today is a PERMA survey. So PERMA is the brainchild of Martin Seligman, the kind of forefather of positive psychology. He was asked, how do we get, what's the one thing we can do to improve well-being in workplaces? He said, measure it, and then people will take tools into their own hand. So a lady called Michelle McQuaid, Dr. Michelle McQuaid, has taken that idea and brought it a wee bit kind of further forward in recent years, and has developed this brilliant online tool called the PERMA survey. So again, I've popped the link in the chat there. You can get that sense yourself of where your well-being is. And then she's taken the work of a guy called BJ Fogg, a brilliant little book called Tiny Habits, and says, how is it that we bring those different elements that make up well-being and bring them from an idea into reality? Really, really practical, really easy to use. You can work your way through that PERMA model, give you brilliant bits and pieces. And then lastly, I'm going to shut up, I promise. After this is one idea around what you can do as an organisation. So I want just to talk about appreciative inquiry just for a second. So many of you will know what appreciative inquiry is. It's a tried and tested change methodology that helps us study what gives life to a living system. We identify what gives life to the living system, and it helps us to focus on what works rather than what isn't working. It leads to co-design in a future, and it guides us away into clear co-production that is positive, collective, and actionable. We've been doing heaps and heaps of work in this space for organisations recently, particularly as they transition back into the new thing that's happening next. So this new normal thing, if you're playing COVID bingo, there you go, you can circle new normal. I've said it. So that's what we do. There's 4 parts to that. We discover what gives life. We dream about the future. What do we want for our organisation? What do we want it to do? How do we want it to achieve it? We try and design some of those focus. What does that look like? How might we achieve that? And then lastly, we think about destiny. So what are the practical elements of that? Who does what, where, when, and why? Because it's created together, everybody feels like they're part of it. We meet basic core human conditions. People are seen, people are heard, people are valued, people are listened to, relationships are built, relationships are strengthened. All those core human conditions are coming forward. I'm going to shut up there because I could talk about this for weeks and weeks and weeks, but I won't. The last thing I will do is pop an Appreciative Inquiry Summit playbook into the chat right there, and that's 6 links delivered.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Alan. That's amazing. I'm slightly chucking you in at the deep end here, Bruce. Like you've come
no, not at all.
in the middle of a speaker. So I'm really, really pleased that Bruce Daisley has joined us. Take your time, Bruce. We've still got until 3:30, so we've got a bit of time. Hopefully Moira will appear at some point with a headset. Who knows what will happen? But I'll hand you over to Bruce Daisley just now.
Yeah, hi there. So I'm Bruce Daisley. I think sort of Ross properly introduced me at the start, but I I've spent a lot of time sort of working through my career in tech firms, but also in studying a wide range of other organizations. And probably the big thing for me is that I've probably spent the last 3 years doing a podcast into workplace culture. That's, the most recent episode involved looking at firefighters. I've looked at NHS hospitals. I've looked at the police. So all manner of things that aren't necessarily in sort of, the jobs that get the headlines, but certainly the jobs that involve all of the stresses that we all need to deal with right now. It's a really interesting time at the moment, and I've sort of devoted a lot of my energy over the last month or so in doing in posting my stuff on newsletters rather than on podcasts, because strangely people's appetite to listen to things about work has gone down, understandably, during the last few weeks, and it's a reflection that a lot has changed. So I asked the question on social media a few weeks ago: do people feel like they're laughing more or less than they did before? Posed as a really interesting question. 2/3 of people said they felt they were laughing less than they were 2 months, 3 months ago. And I was on a radio interview with a columnist who used to write for the Financial Times, a wonderful writer called Lucy Kellaway, and she used to write about office life and the secret life of the office. And she said the thing that she's mourning is the fact that she can't be a different person. Sort of really interesting and fun and vivid description of the way that we used to live different lives, and while some of us might be finding home life claustrophobic or frustrating or a wonderful escape from work, there was always multiple elements to our personality. It really poses a question for me about where we are in the world of transitioning and what's going to happen. So I spent some time chatting to a few different organizations over the last week or so, and something really interesting came out. I chatted to someone who worked at a media organization. He said, we used to have 1,400 people coming into this building every day. Now, for the last 8 weeks, we've had 30, and the product's been the same. Now, for media organizations, we often see them in the news because they're newsworthy, but often they're beset with financial difficulties like every other business. But because we see them in the news, we can witness the challenges that they're having. And he said, anyone who believes we're going to go back to the way we were doing things before is bananas. I chatted to someone who worked at a property firm, and they said the challenge is, even until a vaccine comes around, office occupancy can be between 30 and 50% of what it used to be the norm. So the challenge for all of us is that almost certainly for the next 12 months, very possibly for the next 18 months, we're going to be in some degree of disruption. And the challenge then becomes, like that media organisation, that the average desk in London is somewhere in the region of about £5,000, £6,000 a year. In fact, there are companies that spend £15,000 per desk. So you can imagine the saving, if you've got, in that case, 1,400 workers, the saving of getting rid of 90% of the desks is in the region of £7 million a year. Phenomenal saving when we're in the midst of this big recession stroke depression. And I think a lot of these things are going to force changes upon us that probably were bubbling along anyway. These trends about agile working, as we were just about to hear, the trends about sort of allowing a degree of flexibility had already started. Companies were recognizing that either when it was employee-led, the employees were asking for a bit more flexibility, or whether it was because we were trying to be more progressive employers, we were already moving in this direction. And I think, a few of us have witnessed that the co-working trend has meant that it's allowed us in some ways to say, actually, we're going to shift to hot desks. Half of US multinationals at the start of this year were surveyed, and half of US multinationals said that they were shifting their companies to hot desking. So to some extent, we are changing the way we're configuring the office. And the question then becomes, well, if this is going to last for the next 18 months, if almost certainly property, the firms that we work in, the organizations we work in, the charities we work in are going to reduce our footprints and have a smaller office space, it does beg the question, what are you going to do to perform the key functions that the office used to maintain? And this is the sort of thing that I've been trying to source and discuss in my newsletter. I guess I spoke yesterday to a major property architecture firm, and I said to them, what's the key thing? What are the things that you guys are thinking about? And he said, look, what's the killer function in the office? It's about community and coming together. It's about that sort of chance encounter that you had, that someone might talk to someone else in the office, and some business innovation, some provocation comes from it. And there's some wonderful research on this. So probably the thing that, as I was someone who worked at a tech firm, and then I found myself becoming consumed and interested in workplace culture, one of the people I became most captivated with was a guy called Alex Pentland, Sandy Pentland he's sometimes called. He's a professor at MIT. And he did some fascinating work. If you've ever seen children playing a game of The Sims or a computer simulation, he tried to do some analysis of workplaces like that, sort of watching us like ants, sort of scurrying around between each other. And he did some wonderful work. In fact, I gave a shout out to it in my newsletter last week, because he did one piece of work that was really fascinating. He discovered the average British worker is very consistent across the world. We spend about 16 hours a week in meetings. I suspect a lot of us are spending that amount of time in Zoom meetings or Microsoft Teams meetings right now. We spend 2 days a week of our cognitive effort in those interventions. But what Alex Pentland discovered, when he tracked the productivity, the creativity of workers, he discovered that most of the good stuff happens not in those 2 days a week of meetings, but in the gaps between them. The spaces between things. Really interestingly, and the talk I shared last week that I can very happily share in the comments in a second, but really interestingly, he discovered that the reason why the gaps between things was so productive is because when the boss is in the room, let's say Ross is our boss, we're kind of scared, this slight absence of psychological safety. We're kind of scared to say why we think that idea that Ross has come up with that won't work. So what happens is I slink over to your desk afterwards and I say, look, you know what, that won't work. Why don't we go and tell Ross we'll do it like this? And this is the interesting discovery that Sandy Pentland found. He found that the magic of work happens in the gaps between things. Right, but that poses a really interesting question, doesn't it, for us right now? Because if what we've done is we've recreated these Zoom meetings to replace the meetings we used to have, where's the gaps between things? Where's those chance encounters by the lifts? Where's bumping into someone in Greg's and saying, look, I'm just worried about, where are those chance interventions? And I think it poses really interesting questions about how we evolve from where we are. A lot of us treated when we went home, when we went on lockdown, a few of us left plants on our desks because this didn't feel real, right? It didn't feel like this was going to last for a long time. All of a sudden you realize, wow, we're into the 3rd month of this, and this is almost certainly going to push forwards to some extent going forwards. And exactly that mindset of the plant is what a lot of us had. And actually, if we're going to build this new version of work culture, if we're going to make sure that our workplaces feel as energized as they may be used to, or maybe we want them even more energized, we need to think about how we can build something for the long term. And then if we do get the opportunity to return to those busy workplaces that were so good at building community and coming together, then that will be an advantage for us. But I think a lot of organizations are thinking about right now is, how do you build good workplace culture when you've got no workplace? Really fundamental challenge. For me, the people that I'm most inspired by and most intrigued by, the people who've been doing this for a long time. So the one thing that I've been really interested in doing is studying a lot of organizations who sprung up in the last 10, 15 years, 10 years in particular. Because what a lot of organizations who are new sprung up and did is they realized, as they were setting up in the last decade, they realized that actually their office space was an expense that they might be reluctant to commit to in the long term. So organizations like Automatic, who are the company behind WordPress. So WordPress are like the silent secret of the internet. Quarter of the whole internet is on WordPress, but we sort of never hear about it. But what WordPress do is they've never had an office. In fact, the only time they've had office space is when they were trying to raise funding. And what they discovered was that there's a lot of things, they almost call it as like the stages of being remote. there's a lot of things that when we first go into remote work, we try to replicate. So that might be, we try and do the meetings as we used to do them. We gather everyone in a room together because that's how things work when you're physically, socially connected to each other. But what they discover over time is, yes, having those moments can be incredibly helpful, but you need to be far more sparing with them. Actually bringing everyone together with the only objective of seeing everyone's clean face on a Zoom call sometimes isn't as productive as we might imagine it to be. It sort of serves the leader's purpose of keeping us all seeming like we're interested, but it actually is destructive. People can end up at the end of the day feeling exhausted from the amount of video calls they're doing. What these remote organizations talk about, really interestingly, Automatic, the WordPress company, talk about a fundamental flipping. They say if the old model of work is that you spend 11 months a year in the office and 1 month a year away on holiday, we want to invert that. You're going to spend 11 months a year in your house and 1 month a year together with each other. That's really interesting, because then it becomes very intentionally about when you get people together, how can you re-energize them? And the really interesting thing for me, one of the things that people often say is they say, very interestingly, we say, okay, so we've built a good workplace culture in the way that things used to be, but can you build a passionate community? Can you forge a strong emotional connection between people when they don't see each other face to face every day? And I would point out, for the benefit of anyone who is in any doubt, I'd like to introduce you to the World Wide Web, because the internet's been doing that for 20 years. The internet has been bringing people together to passionately connect them through screens for a long time. But probably we need to change our models. So we've been really focused on how can people in physical proximity to each other, sort of squeezed in together, how can they feel part of something? I guess, the model of that through history would be something like church, would be something like town hall meetings. But what we need to do is think of our model. And I'd say it's something closer to Comic-Con. So Comic-Con is this colourful collection of comic fans who get together. You'll probably see on an episode of Big Bang Theory or Friends occasionally. You see, we might sort of call them geeks coming together. They often wear costumes, they gather, and it's an explosion of colour once or twice a year. And that's what we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking, okay, so what are the upsides and the downsides of this, of people working remotely? Well, the upsides are people are loving their alarm clock going off a bit later. People are loving the fact that, if they've got space to work from home, they can order their day a bit more. It's, don't get me wrong, I've had stress dreams over the last 12 weeks as much as anyone. I've had existential dread that my trip to Morrison's is going to cause me to die. So we've all had those sort of moments of doubt and uncertainty. But I think the interesting thing is that there are certainly some good upsides from this. And that's what I'd say. If we can think more about those communities who passionately exist online, but then bring occasional get-togethers where they're physical, where they're surrounded with each other, where they energize each other, that's probably closer to the new version of work. I chatted to one other organization last week. He said, very much our challenge is going to be, there's the blue team and the red team going forwards. Blue team are going to be coming in Monday, Wednesdays, alternate Fridays. Red team are going to be coming in Tuesday, Thursday, alternate Fridays. He said, half the team are never going to meet the other parts of the team. And this is why we need to think far more intentionally about when we do get people together, how can they be these big events, these big happenings, our Comic-Cons. So I think, that's the really critical. Any of us who are thinking, let's just carry on doing what we used to do, we're going to make two mistakes there. First, we're going to miss the opportunity presented to us by alleviating people of some of the ways that we've been doing things. And secondly, we're going to try and do some of the things that used to work in the old world that won't work now. We've routinely observing that people are getting exhausted by having these hours upon hours of Zoom calls. So I think, finding a new way to do that, for me, I've really been led down the path of those inspiring pioneers. And, like I say, on my newsletter, I share a lot of the simplified versions of what they do and what we can learn from them. my feeling, I worked 12 years in tech firms and then sort of another decade in online jobs before. I'm resolute that quite often tech firms can be guilty of misdirection. Quite often tech firms tell us that they've got amazing cultures, and they're definitely not. They've not got anything better than any other organization, an average organization. So tech firms can be guilty of misdirection, and that's definitely the way that I'm perceiving this. I'm trying to pick through some of the nonsense that we're being told right now, but I think there is some lessons for all of us. Any lessons, and I think we're going to sort of hear from Moira, any lessons that organizations are transitioning to agile working, to new ways of working, definitely going to be helpful for all of us going through this live experiment. But my feeling is that this is probably the biggest fundamental change to work that we're ever going to experience in our lives. No doubt there's going to be a lot of things that we get wrong, a lot of things that we maybe experiment and then we wish we hadn't done. And I think, unfortunately, that's been the thing that's been putting off us making changes until now. I would hope that there's going to be enough evidence and enough sharing of experience that can hopefully transition us through to a positive experience of this. Final thing I'll finish on is that we need to all be very aware that this is generationally stratified. That there might be a few of you that are working out of spare rooms because children have left home. Or there might be a few of you who've got a wonderful home office space that's got a lovely vista across the fields to the back of your house. But a lot of the people I've been on calls with in the last couple of weeks, who are probably the quiet people who don't really speak up, have been working all day from their bed, or have been working all day from a table in the corner of their room. And, and I have heard a few organizations saying, we're doing home assessments, we're assessing people's workstations. But there's a lot of people who are too embarrassed to admit that they'll have their home assessment on something, but they can't work on there the majority of the time. So I think it's really important that we empathise. I joined a London Business School call a couple of weeks ago, and one of the lecturers said, "Well, I think we're into week 6. It was at the time." She said, "We've all got our home offices well sorted now." And I thought that's the danger of this. Privilege can be something that blinds us to the experience of others. So I think, right now we all need to have our spider senses tingling. We need to be as empathetic as we possibly be, that our experience isn't necessarily everyone else's experience. It's a whole lot of people working alone. It's a whole lot of people that, their inner city apartment wasn't set up for home working, and actually going to an office every day gave them some escape. So the more that we can turn our empathy up, I think the more that all of us can help our teams and our cultures prevail in the coming months and years.
Thank you so much, Bruce. There's been lots of love for your newsletter in the chat there. So there's that link has been shared a few times. There's a few kind of avid subscribers that are in there. And it's interesting to ask the question in the chat about who's thinking about rethinking their office space after this, and it's just a resounding yes straight down the list. Now, I'm conscious for some people that's going to be a rethink because of social distancing, but for a lot of people I've been speaking in the charity sector where they've maybe got city centre offices because they're close to the Scottish Parliament or because they're in London, and actually rethinking what that needs to look like. For a lot of charities, it's a huge overhead every month. Okay, I don't see Moira.
The final thing to add on there is that a lot of us are going to think very similar to what WordPress went through. They're going to think, okay, so what does having a physical location offer us? Offers us a space to bring someone in and showing them some razzle dazzle, to show them that we exist. But to some extent, that can be shared with other organizations, and it needs a smaller footprint. Also can be a space to bring the team in and energize them once every 2 months, 3 months, thinking that WordPress model, 1 month a year where we get together. And I think that's it. A lot of organizations, I chatted to a local authority last week who said, we've got 3 big buildings. We're thinking really quickly now, let's either sell one of them or flip it to social housing. And, I shan't get into it, but that's one of the potential upsides of this, that could be a whole lot of commercial real estate in city centres that we have to flip into housing for young people. So, we could be in a situation where property prices in city centres are affordable available again for people who want to work, and we could get a situation like that. I'm an eternal optimist. I do hope that that's the case, but yeah, absolutely, we've got to rethink what we're using our space for.
Yeah, totally agree. I just, the last comment in the chat there, Nathan's very valid comment. I need a place to store things. Where is Nathan going to keep all his t-shirts if he doesn't have a city centre office in Edinburgh? So, you ever heard of storage facilities, Nathan? Come on. Right, anyway, has anyone got any questions that wants to jump in the video chat, and then we'll pick up some from chat, and then hopefully once Moira gets back in we can bring it in, but if not, we'll see what's going to happen in there. If you want to ask questions, you want to raise your finger, so either for Ali or for Bruce. Anyone who's on video just now. Lucy.
Yep.
If you want to unmute yourself, there we go.
Hello everybody. Question for Bruce. Could this be the end of the weekend? I like my weekends, but what's going to happen, do you think?
Really good question. I think, one of the interesting lessons that we can learn from people who've worked remotely or freelance for a long time is that the important separation that they have to forge in their minds. And for a lot of us, that separation, if we were traveling somewhere, we'd put music on, we'd almost decompress and recompress as we went into work situations. Spotify tell us that listening is down 20%. I suspect because that commute has disappeared. So most certainly, we probably do need to rethink the way that we signal these things to ourselves. One of the worrying things is that I think initially we went into a degree of chaos the first few weeks and month or so of this, is that we're all just frankly just trying to work out how to do all of this, and before it became ritualized. But one of the things that you observe is that there's an American networking company that said that the average hours that people are connecting to their work email in the US has gone up 3 hours a day. Unbelievable. People are working longer and longer and longer. Partly why is because right now there's a quarter of the US labor force unemployed. Here, we've got a furloughing scheme, so our numbers are less stark. But even the people who are still in jobs are thinking, well, I could be furloughed next. I need to demonstrate that, I'm a good person. I'm actively engaged. And I think the challenge for a lot of us is that it becomes digital presenteeism. I read something yesterday where people were talking about whether they use Google Hangouts, and Google Hangouts has got a green dot, or Slack has got a green dot. People want their green dot to be on all the time. Why? Because it means they're not away from their machine. And people are sort of trying to stay, trying to demonstrate these signals of digital presenteeism, show that they're on, and sort of demonstrate, that they're engaged with their jobs. It's for what you talk about there, sort of forging a separation between home life and work life. Clearly, those trends are really bad trends. And probably if we rewound the clock 12 months ago and we were talking about what are the big trends in work, the big trend 12 months ago was burnout. And I think it would be a mistake for us to think, we're all living this far more serene life where our alarm clock isn't going off at a time beginning with 5 or 6. It's beginning far later. And it'd be a mistake for us to think, actually, we've transitioned to something that's more sustainable and more happy. So look, really important point. I do hope that, over time we're going to get a better equilibrium with this, but I think to your point there, I start with a perspective of optimism, but I think our experience with optimism, I've worked at 2 internet companies where we were filled with massive optimism at the start, and then experience sort of gave us a different perspective. I think, realism is probably an important quality to hold ourselves accountable to as well.
I'm doing the classic thing of not unmuting myself. Also the classic thing where I've tried to be really clever, so I've got a second screen so that I can keep an eye on what people on Twitter are saying about the call, and have speaker bios up, and then remember that the cursor is on that screen, and then I'm like, why can't I click the thing? So this is it's not going well. So I've had a message from Moira on Twitter, just to say that even her 20-year-old couldn't get her back into the Zoom call. So I have a funny feeling that Moira may have been hit by the upgrade, so she's probably on an old version of Zoom, and for whatever reason it's not letting her back in. We will get Moira on another call because she's got, in terms of that change they've made with Agile Working at House and Option Scotland, some really interesting stuff. I will make sure Moira has a headset. If she doesn't have one, I will send her a headset so she can join the call. Any other questions for Ali or Bruce from the room? Just raise your finger and we can bring you in. If not, we can scroll through chat because there's been some good ones in there. Right, I'm going to pick up not so much a question, but a point that was made. Actually, I think it was Nathan made it, but I think a lot of people have been kind of talking about this in the charity sector, this notion of a 4-day week. I don't know, it'd be good to get both speakers' opinions on this. Ali, any thoughts on the 4-day week and whether it's a good thing for the charity sector?
Yeah, I think it is. I think anything that builds on that sense of like autonomy, you know, that you know, particularly when we're going into something that we don't recognise in the future, you know, we have to kind of build the areas where we can. So it's that kind of notion of working with the strengths. So, you know, if a 4-day week then allows us to maybe pick up other parts of our lives where we, you know, maybe hobbies or family or whatever, and build around that, then I think that's a great thing. You know, the whole idea of being measured on our output rather than our time, you know, I thankfully has been disappearing gradually over time, but hopefully this will kind of finally kick that over the cliff, and we'll get a chance to really, I don't know if it was Nathan had said before in one of the calls that he works brilliantly well in the evenings. You know, I'm the same. You know, I can ride my bike for 4 or 5 hours in a day, sit down on my desk, and in an hour produce what I can force out sitting at my desk for 2 days. You know, what's better for me? What's better for society? You know, it's that more autonomy that we can build in and get the focus to, you know, outputs rather than presenteeism is all good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
Couldn't agree more. The tragedy is that as we started this year, in February, there was 2 really good books written. A book called Shorter by Alex Sujong King Pong is sort of about the trend of working 4-day weeks. And in fact, you know, 40%, 50% of the companies in his book are British companies. Team companies in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Scotland, all over that have been trying sort of shorter working weeks. 2 trends: 6-hour days or 4-day weeks. And there was another book about a chief exec in Australia who'd taken his company to a 4-day week for productivity reasons. He said, look, as long as our productivity stays the same, we're all on a 4-day week, which is an interesting experiment. I interviewed both of them on my podcast. And we were moving decidedly in that direction. However, when I chatted to Americans at the time, Americans are like, oh, the future of work is remote. So it's like this big difference between, you know, US people wanted to go to their escape in Boulder, Colorado and be dialing in 5 days a week, fully switched on. And British people sort of wanted the sociability, the trappings of coming into an office, the office banter, the sort of stumbling into the pub once a week or once every sort of quarter. We wanted those aspects of socialization. And the interesting thing is that probably this unfortunate experiment we've been pushed into has probably forced us down the remote route. The guys, the people who sort of focus on this, the 5 models of remote working that I talked about, they talk very resolutely about how we can actually find ourselves working, like Ali says, finding ourselves working in a more flexible way, you know, saying goodbye to all this glorious sunshine, but then relaxing all evenings just seems to be a grand injustice to nature, if nothing else. And, you know, I think the companies who learn to do remote well learn to say, do the work when you need to do the work rather than be tethered to the computer. You know, probably the interesting debate, it's in the questions that are popping up there, is moving to a 4-day week or a 6-hour day all about compressed hours? Well, I think, you know, in truth, it often starts like that, but it often comes down to exactly what Ali says. It's focusing on outputs rather than inputs. So it's saying that, you know, there was a really interesting experiment from a professor at Yale that I put in my book. I can't remember his name, but he was a professor who wanted to work out how long his maths assignments were taking for students. So he invited everyone who did his maths assignments to keep a full log of the amount of time they took. What he discovered was the best students were taking taking, or the fastest students were taking about 1/10 of the time of the slowest students, and about 4 times the average student. But what he discovered was there was no correlation between time spent and results. Effectively, some people were just doing it really quickly, some people were doing it slowly, but broadly, that wasn't the determinant of how good your work was. What he discovered, though, is when he transferred that to work projects. In fact, a researcher called Jeff Sutherland took that to work projects. He discovered that a medium-sized work project could be done in either 2 weeks for the best teams, or the worst teams were doing it in 4,000 weeks. And any of you who've sat in committee meetings and status meetings and felt like, I swear we've decided this, will recognize that, that 4,000 weeks has got some origin of truth in it. And that's the interesting thing. Sometimes we've biased from, the things where they've felt like they're doing work. There's 40 of us in a room and we're having a 2-hour meeting. It feels like a really important moment, rather than, could we do this quicker? Could we do it more effectively? So I think, the trend of moving to outputs rather than inputs is probably an incredibly healthy one for us to go through. But it's a fundamental change to the way we work. So much with knowledge work, very different to manual work. If you've got someone painting your house for you, you can see whether he's done 4 walls or 2 walls. With knowledge work, we often struggle to do that. We often struggle to say, has Jess done a good day's work today? I'm not sure. Unless she's making herself look busy, she's sitting at her computer with a frown all day, I'm not sure that she's actually done a good day's work. And that's the challenge for us in knowledge work, because it's not as easy to measure. We often fall foul of trying to go down the route of presenteeism as a measure of whether people are doing it well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually been loads of interesting stuff coming through the chat. So Jen's point about she's been working at home for a 1.5 years now, saves a fortune commuting, happier overall, has a much tidier house, bonus. And actually, I think, particularly like living in Scotland, is the tiny number of sunny days in the year, but that feeling that I have to be sitting in a house 9 to 5 on those 7 sunny days that I might get over a 4-month span, literally it might be as low as that. Like, what is that doing to us? Ali, sorry, you wanted to come in on that one? Yeah,
just the blue sky thing, because we're that's very close to us all right now, and it's going to be disappearing after today. So it's poor for our well-being, for our mental health. There's some brilliant new research there that says blue skies or blue light, like water, is incredibly good for us. It's incredibly good for us. So if you're trapped in, literally my home office space was over on the other side of that room, where it was the most convenient place for me to be, just tucked in out of the way. But after 6-7 weeks of being stuck in there, I was even paler than I am right now. So I was just draining away, just not being next to that light, moving close at the window. But that blue light, sunshine stuff is critical for us, and that's one of Johann Hari's reasons in his book that says why we suffer from anxiety and depression right now is we do not have that meaningful connection to the outside world. So that reconfiguration of what our kit means. For example, we maybe pick up some of the walking that we've been doing, or some of the cycling that we've been doing, or some of the exercise that we've been doing outside, and bring that into our normal life. The long-term impact for that as a society means that we're going to be saving hundreds of millions, billions of pounds down the line in terms of health that we're paying to keep people artificially well at the minute, whereas we just, we do the active and effective intervention now where we all stay a little bit healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maddie, anything interesting that you've seen coming through the chat? 'Cause it was moving really quickly, actually, as both speakers were talking there. Any interesting points or questions?
Yeah, I'm gonna pick on Nathan, because we were talking about different models. Sorry, Nathan, it's clearly that T-shirt. There's back to that. So the 4-hour, I was going to say the 4-hour week. That would be amazing. The 4-day week. Just looking at different models of working, and Nathan, you had a different one around actually using a hackathon. So you're doing things in 8 weeks, and Jean's kind of picked up on that as a more kind of agile working, which probably fits with where Moira was coming from. So just perhaps in the absence of Moira, Nathan, we could very much put the spotlight on you to talk about that a bit more, if that would be all right.
Yeah, so the hackathon model that we're using isn't necessarily about thinking about our working culture, but more about, you know, when we're engaging or collaborating with other people. So we've started to work with traditional hackathon providers to try and develop some sort of model where traditionally we would have, you know, a monthly policy seminar, and we'd have a series of, say, 5 or 6 of them to start discussions about a certain thing. What we want to do is use, because we're all on Zoom, on digital, is use a hackathon model to condense that work into smaller chunks of really action-focused, outcome-focused thinking and work. So bringing together, you know, a group of 12 to 15 people across the HIV sector to you know, use a blank sheet of paper and design what a service could look like in the post-coronavirus era. That, you know, that's the space where I think some charities, specifically in the health sector, have a lot of power, is because we work with people with lived experience. We can really do that sort of that blue sky thinking and really push some of these things along. Now, people are working a lot more productively and a lot faster, and people are compromising more as well. What used to be a method where, you know, I go back to our HIV testing work, where we've been calling for a HIV home test service to be around for 2.5 years. And because of coronavirus, we got one set up with buy-in from all the health boards in 4 weeks. You know, and so there's it's not just that we're working faster, it's that the ability to compromise and get the best for people is also there because of this strange time that we're in. And that's where I think we've got the opportunity to do things differently. And that's why I sort of thought about the hackathon model as coming up with what is that perfect service look like. That was maybe a bit more of a ramble than you were expecting.
No, I think it makes sense. Thank you. I did put you on the spot. Sorry, Nathan. It's just as a different kind of way of working. Ian Dunn's had his hand up for a while, so apologies.
Oh,
Ian,
has it? He's off. He's on the second screen. It's like everyone on the second screen of Zoom doesn't exist to me, so I need to remember that there's more than one screen. Ian, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, that was great. That was really good, guys. I feel like a trendsetter because I'm going for a walk while I'm listening.
Amazing.
As you
I love
can
it.
see, so it's quite nice.
Yeah,
Bruce, I was really interested, Bruce, in what you were saying about the most valuable bit of meetings being the space between meetings, most valuable bit of work. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about how you can maybe recreate those dynamics digitally, if there's any way to do it.
Yeah, Sandy Pentland says that he says that he says normally when you look into the origins of good things, that they generally happen in the chit chat that's not sanctioned between people. So, you know, it might be a quick chat but about, did you watch that thing on Netflix? Did you watch that thing? Did you watch the game at the weekend? What did you do at the weekend? And it's often things between departments, between teams, that leads to sort of clever intervention. I'll share in the chat. I mean, anyone who goes 2 newsletters back on my newsletter will see a picture of him, and there's a talk that's fantastic to watch him actually describe his whole methodology and what he learnt about it. He broadly says that we need to try to bring about more social interactions between people. Now, look, in the current world, that might be, you know, team drinks, I guess, but I don't think it's got the same energy, has it? The thing about team drinks is that these 50 conversations going on in a room. You set up a team Zoom call and you've got one call that's probably dominated by 1 or 2 people. So it's just not the same energy. And I think probably trying to reduce the amount of official meetings we have and encourage little gaps that form and you know, project teams that maybe are self-appointing, that, you know, 3 people want to work on something and they're gonna, you know, they might be from different departments, but they're gonna have closer interactions as they work together. I think, you know, really interesting thing for me, I'll give you one final bit of research. There was a really interesting thing that you might think is completely unrelated, and it was studying American couples who lived distant relationships. So this was an idea that one of them lived in Philadelphia, one of them lived in Los Angeles, and the researchers wanted to understand which ones' relationships stayed together. What they discovered was the ones whose relationships stayed together were the ones who phoned each other every day to talk about trivial things. And it's a really interesting thing. It's just a good reminder that sometimes it's those connections that feel trivial, they feel non-essential, but they can be some of the most powerful things for making us feel connected to each other. So I think it's about that. It's about trying to allow your team space that they can forge connections with maybe people who are interested to work on the projects they're working on, and try and really stand down the burden of work on people to allow them to fill it with things that, you know, are productive and creative.
Really nice examples actually coming through in the chats, things like team quizzes and having kind of virtual coffees. There's a really nice thing, I can't remember the charity's name, it's one of the bloodborne virus charities, I can't remember the name anyway. So they used to do a thing pre-COVID, and it wasn't digital, where they basically randomly select 2 members of staff and give them a budget to go out and have a coffee and cake, and allowed them that time in their day. And what they found was staff teams reported a massive increase in understanding of what other areas of the business were doing. So someone who works in a comms team might speak to someone who's a scientist, and someone who works in the research team might speak to someone who's in the admin team, and now they better understand how back-end processes work. But that simple action of an hour out your time allowed by your boss and the budget to go out for a coffee out with the work environment was enough for people to better understand what those different groups were doing. There's a really nice tool which someone posted in the chat actually called Donut. Who was it that posted that?
Jean Ferguson.
Yeah, Jean, have you used Donut? Do you want to tell everyone about it? Oh, you need to unmute if you're... There we go. Hey.
Yeah, so I've been working with the Scottish Tech Army, that charity that's offering digital support to all you charities. So if you haven't heard of it, please go look up the Scottish Tech Army. And they had 700 volunteers. Not everybody can volunteer at once. There's just not, we can't get the projects through the pipeline fast enough. So to keep people connected, they set up Donut, and it runs twice a week in Slack, connected, and it puts 4 people together and just says, think it'd be a good idea if you got together. Met some fantastic people, had some great chats. Because it's a new, shiny organisation, there's not that same, you know, understand each other's jobs yet, really, although there's a lot of understanding of the bits we've each found out about STA. And yeah, I'd really, if you've got Slack, I think we got a free license for a while, so it's probably not free forever, but it might be worth trying just now if you have that. Can I ask a question while I'm here, please, Ross?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Thank
who's
you.
it for first of all?
Either Bruce.
Okay, cool. Let's go with both. Yeah.
Could an organisation be successful, and I'm thinking of the Scottish Tech Army, and never have face-to-face meetings? Because we are volunteers and we only meet on Zoom and Slack just now.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what the WordPress company do it. There's a company called Buffer that do it. There's a company called Basecamp that do it. You know, when I first discovered, I chatted to someone from my podcast from an organization called Basecamp, and when I first discovered that they hired people without ever meeting them in physical presence, it was like I was astonished. I think, you know, and maybe I feel like a dinosaur in comparison, but it's like, what, you're hiring someone and you've never met them, but what about like that vibe they give off when you finally encounter them? It's like but you know, it's decidedly there's a lot of organizations that do it. So these people who, and what they discover very quickly is they say, actually, this has got some upsides and downsides. So, you know, it's liberating for a lot of people that they don't have to do a daily commute. In the US, it means that you don't have to live in the sort of the big hubs of population. You can live in these sort of vast expanses. Someone on an average salary can afford a lovely house if you live out of big cities in the US, because there's so much space. And they discover very quickly, actually, this can be something that energizes their organization. So yeah, there is a lot of organizations that do it, that never have any face-to-face. I think, you know, one of the dangers of the likely British model is that we will expect that people will schlep themselves into Edinburgh or Glasgow twice a week. And so, you know, we don't fully get the advantage of allowing people to be out in the Highlands, out in the islands. And, you know, I think probably thinking a bit more about what could we do to allow people to be energized by less frequent get-togethers, but live wherever they want. Absolutely. I think, you know, there's a lot of companies that will be doing that right now.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Bruce. Ali, do you want to?
Yeah, I guess the most important bit, Jean, there is about purpose. For me, you know, is if you have that shared purpose and that shared sense of meaning and understanding and connection together, you know, we don't physically have to meet all the time to get that shared sense of purpose and meaning. You know, that's what brings us together. You know, that, I guess it's how we interpret the world. It's much easier when we're physically next to that person. But it's not, you know, just the fact that we are next to a person doesn't automatically mean there is meaning, purpose and connection there. It is that shared cause, I guess, that you have that, and you could, you know, make a pretty damn good argument that you can create that better online through the tools that we have available, but probably not for every organisation.
Cool. Does that answer your question? Cool. Okay. Any other people want to go in with questions? Still got a couple bit more time. Susie Hamilton, do you want to jump in?
Okay, part of our challenge is we've got staff, lots of staff are not office workers, and they're at various different levels of their digital journey. So some are just not used to using any digital applications at all, and we're trying to move forward with Agile Working with people at all sorts of different levels. So we're just looking for any advice or tips for people getting people on board with this relatively quickly.
I wonder if there's anyone from the wider group who's had similar experiences. I wouldn't necessarily feel that this is my expertise personally.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? Anyone feel comfortable answering that one? Oh, Maddie, you were.
Sorry, Susie, I was trying to find you something. I'll put the link in there as well. This was something that we did quite a lot of work around, and my colleague Claire is actually involved in with an SCVO, is around looking at staff skills, so pre-COVID, and then she's also looking at about working with staff during COVID, as well as people that use the services, about increasing digital skills. And one of the things that we talk about is to find out, we talk about the hooks of that whole onboarding process, finding out what it is that's the most benefit to them. So most of the time it's not work first, it's personal life first. So what are they using in the personal life? What platforms are they on? What tools are they using? And how can that be integrated into the work that they're doing? So Ross talks about this quite a lot in our senior leader program. So if people are using WhatsApp in their personal life, or they're on Facebook, is there, you know, what could they be using that in the workspace? Are there similar things that they could be using, so they don't have to learn something completely new, which then doesn't kind of put them on the back foot and go, oh, and here's something else I don't know? Or where are the people that they're working with, what platforms are they using? And we've also got the essential skills checklist, which I'll post a link to, Susie, and that can then help you identify gaps really quickly in where are the skills gaps within the staff, and what actually can we use really quickly. So it just kind of takes a lot of the fear out of it as well, about we're not expected to be digital experts, we're not gurus. None of us really understand how to work this stuff. We're all just figuring it out as we go along. Even the folk in the tech world don't know how to work everything, because it all happens so fast. So some might be good at this, some might be good at others. So it's just about having a level of confidence to ask and making sure that people feel safe, which is back to kind of Ali and Bruce's thing about that. I think Bruce, both of them used that word about psychological safety. As long as they feel safe enough to say, I don't really know how to work this. But also, I think one of the things, Ross, that Ross would also say is, it's not a nice to have, it's a necessity. Particularly now, folk have to learn how to use this. So, it's that kind of way of doing it. And I think there's Gillian Monroe from the Scottish Government there, service design is kind of posted a good point. And I think there's somebody called Lillian who would quite like to come in. So I'll stop talking. That's my SCVO plug. Sorry, Susie.
No, I thought they were all really good points, Maddie, really important points. Sorry, Lindsay, you had your hand up. Do you want to come in first, and then we'll probably got time for another question or two.
Yeah, I just wanted to feedback. I mean, I'm head of services of a relatively small charity, about 30 staff, but within our staff team, we had some that were heavy users of digital technology and social media, and if anything, it's made the staff members that perhaps weren't as open to it to become upskilled, and actually the wider team has been really good in facilitating that. I mean, our service users are blind and partially sighted people, so we're having regular WhatsApp chats, Zoom calls, quizzes with people all over Scotland with little or no vision. So I think that kind of spurs the staff on to say, well, you know, perhaps I should get up to speed. And it's just given the staff team a push, and it's been really good for me to see those ones that were lagging behind a little bit really grab the nettle and get up to speed and get those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen this a lot, actually. It's an interesting thing, that kind of slightly beyond the workplace issue, where a lot of charities that were geographically focused, who have pivoted really quickly into providing services and support during COVID, who have suddenly found themselves operating in a small geographical area, whether it's Scotland or elsewhere, who now suddenly have a global reach because they're doing something interesting online for a certain cohort of people. And for me, actually, there's bigger questions, I guess, just beyond the workplace, but you know, fundamentally, what does it look like to be a charity in 2020 and beyond? And are those geographical boundaries anywhere near as relevant as they once were prior to this point? I think for a lot of really small charities, they're seeing suddenly that potential for that kind of global reach and much bigger impact through their work. So it's a really good point. Maddie, did you say someone else had their hand up?
Yeah, Maria Wilson's got a hand up, and Gillian was also asking a question around.
Yeah, mine's just kind of building on the questions really that's already been asked. I'm trying to do some digital skills work with my team. We've got a massive mix of tech skill. What I'm finding is when I've done kind of more digital benchmarking, they're coming out as scoring quite high. They can use Word, they can use Excel, they feel they're digitally literate. But the reality is they're not, because they're scared of having a go at managing a Zoom call or doing something on Teams or whatever it is. So I'm trying to find a way I can try and build confidence. Bear in mind, I'm also trying to do it from my bedroom as well. You know, I can't just speak to them in the office and show them how to do things, which is how we've traditionally done it. So I just wonder if anyone had any ideas or inspirations. Because it comes with chicken and egg. What comes first, the digital confidence or the support?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so shameless plug. So we're doing some 90-minute training workshops, which we're going to be doing. So part SCVO will be involved in those. So we've got about 23 individual 90-minute workshops that are going to be rolled out, and some of it will be quite kind of specific and technical. So things like using Microsoft Power BI or Tableau. Some of it will be more focused on service design. Some of it's much more focused on comms. We've got like workshops in video and podcasting. So that should help. I think fundamentally, like you hit the nail on the head, that a lot of people have a very old school way of looking at digital. So they look at it as the IT infrastructure in the workplace. So they come to a job, someone teaches them how Excel and Word works, and it's in a very fixed way that possibly hasn't changed for a decade or more. And actually getting them to break out with that comfort zone is a massive ask. So I think the training and the technical ability part of it, but just an understanding that digital in 2020 is not a thing that you're going to break an entire system because you do something wrong. So that culture of exploration and trying things is really important and should underpin everything that you do. And the training, I guess, is just part of it. Bruce or Ali, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, just one dead quick one on that. What comes first? Confidence, full stop. Whatever you're doing, segment it, break it down into little chunks, build confidence in the team first. If you're trying to learn a new skill and your starting point is, I don't know this, I can't do this, I don't recognize this, that task in front of you, it becomes a mountain. If your starting point for that task is, I feel confident, I feel connected, I feel like I can make a mistake, it's normal to make a mistake, you've got an incredibly easier task on your hands. So that confidence building bit comes through relationships, it comes through connection, it comes through, I see you, I hear you, your opinion is important. That it doesn't have to be building confidence in the tech. Confidence is not related to tech or relationships, not there like that. Confidence is human confidence, it's personal confidence. So build that first and then move into your learning and teaching tasks or your development, skills development tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Bruce, any thoughts on that? I guess that kind of notion of confidence and experimentation in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just worth putting people in groups of peers. So, you know, the support isn't necessarily managers or supervisors or you know, the HR and learning department, but you know, it's actually someone else in the same boat. So just reducing some of the embarrassment. A lot of people feel like they're just scared to ask because, you know, last time they asked someone said, what, you don't know that? And so they're just like, I'm never going to ask anything again. So I think, you know, just putting people in lower stress, lower pressure groups.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Right, we've got the 10 minutes left. So Gillian from Scottish Government was on the call. Gillian was wanting to ask a wee question. I did see you, Gillian. Yeah.
I was, yeah. I just wanted to say something though about the kind of digital skills thing as well, kind of things that we're learning at the minute. But I think, I mean, I would say this coming from SD and service design background as well, is when you're using these digital skills, what's the outcome that you want to be able to achieve with it? And as Maddie said, what have people already got and what are they already comfortable with that you can use to achieve that outcome? You don't necessarily need to do new digital things. If everyone's perfectly happy on the phone, then you don't need Zoom, basically. We don't just need to move on to kind of new things all the time. And then another thing that we've found that's worked pretty well in our team is let pioneers go off and play with new things. You know, the people who like doing that, give them a couple of weeks. Don't make everyone experiment with it all at once. And then when they've kind of taken a lot of the stress and danger and uncertainty out of it, then they could, you know, they can come back in and help. And then obviously, you know, in the civil service, never underestimate the power of a good set of desk instructions. You know, we're really, you know, really good at kind of like writing a guide in a Word document that you can put a badge at the top of, and there are plenty of people that will really like a set of paper instructions that they can keep on going back to in their own time, and kind of use in their own way and so on. And that takes a lot of kind of stress and potential worry out of things too. And then the other thing is the phone's your friend. But, you know, again, it just works really well sometimes just to phone somebody up and talk somebody through a digital thing, even if you then end up seeing them on a screen at the end of it. And, you know, just phoning people is really helpful too. Sorry, but my question was, we've been talking about this a lot of, we need to work more asynchronously. And my question is kind of, what's a good place to start?
Yeah, so this is one of the, when you look at the stages of remote, the companies that seem to do this well, they talk a lot about asynchronous working. And I think, you know, so firstly, just to sort of differentiate, a lot of us work synchronously, meaning that, you know, the boss sends an email, it gets the dogs racing, their hair's running, everyone tries to respond as quickly as possible. And so as a consequence of that, we tend to bias to immediacy and promptness. What you discover in organizations that say that they've managed remote working well is that they say they've shifted to asynchronous working. And what they differentiate, firstly, the reasons why you might do it, they say responses are more thoughtful. You post a document, you say, can everyone get their comments in 48 hours? They say what you get from a benefit of that is rather than needing to get everyone in the same room or Zoom together at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, more people need to sort of sit, reflect, and put something more thoughtful there. They say it's a little bit like I've done a big thing on silent meetings. If anyone wants to look at that, but it's a little bit sort of what you get by not optimizing for the quickest voice or the loudest voice. You get something that often is a bit more considered. Now, the companies that do it, they often talk about the software they use. So WordPress talk about using a program called P2, and Basecamp, who are another remote organization, they use their software called Basecamp. I couldn't vouch for either of them, but if you are interested in these things, the companies that do talk about remote working do talk about these things. And I get the impression, I had a little play around with P2. It feels a bit like is a message board. When I was at Twitter, we used to use a lot of Google Docs, and I don't know if any of you used Google Docs. We felt that Google Docs was a pretty good way to capture comments on a document. You know, it's no more sophisticated than anyone who doesn't do it. It's no more sophisticated really than a combination of Word and Facebook. It's just annotating a bit of text and putting your comment into it. It might be daunting, but it's the sort of thing that you could normally teach someone with 5 minutes teaching and maybe 30 minutes of them playing around in a sort of low stress environment. But what we discovered from that is sort of how we used to use silent meetings. What we discovered from that is you do get people commenting on documents, and gaps in documents or sort of questions that everyone's sharing do tend to come up. So I think those tools, I can't, like I say, can't vouch for P2 or for Basecamp, but even something like Google Docs, you could very easily say, if you are interested in this, maybe a good place to start is a former colleague of mine at Twitter wrote something called the Silent Meeting Manifesto. And while that's not what we're talking about right now, he gives, in a blog post that you'll find if you search that, he gives a really interesting take through of why doing something in a shared document actually can produce something very different to watching a PowerPoint presentation of it. So I guess, something to flag. One of my colleagues who was dyslexic said that the mere thought of doing more in documents was the most scary thing that he'd ever heard in his time of work. So, I just want to put a flag up there. This is not necessarily going to be something that everyone in your team says is universally welcomed. It's sort of worth putting that out there. But, if this is a time to try an experiment every couple of weeks, that might be one experiment you choose to give a go to.
Yeah, I thought, that's really good advice there, Bruce. I've put some of the links, so P2, and also a really good blog post actually on how Automatic uses a range of tools and some of the kind of processes and flows there. So you'll get that in the chat. Ali, do you want to quickly jump in?
Yeah, something struck me when Bruce was talking there. I wonder if that asynchronous kind of silent and more considered response time might be that where we find some of those between meeting moments that we talked about at the start of the call. It is that we've done a heap of learning and development stuff online, moving services online or moving training online, and designed all of those different types of centres and learning centres into the training, so people are being engaged consistently, differently all the time. So some synchronous tasks, some asynchronous tasks, some group chats, lots and lots and lots of pauses wherever possible, wherever you can create a space for just that general reflection or bit of connection. It seems to score highest in all the kind of feedback that we're getting. So that's a bit that we're missing right now. So we build it in more. It's new and over time. And yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ali. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. What I thought would be useful to do is Maddie was going to give a wee roundup of just some of the kind of wider stuff that's going on across SCVO to support people. And just before I bring Maddie in, just say thanks to our two speakers. So Ali from Be More Human, thanks so much. And Bruce Daisley. Do go and subscribe to Bruce's newsletter. It is really, really useful. It's free. All the stuff that Bruce has been talking about today, you'll get all these amazing insights but dropped straight into your inbox. So it's really, really good. You can subscribe in the links that are in there. Thank you. Maddie, do you want to tell us a bit about what else is going on? A couple more minutes left.
At SCVO, we've now got a more comprehensive list of events that are coming up. So it's not just what's going on in the digital team. There's a lot more policy, governance events, cyber security events happening. So I'll post a link to the events page. There's loads happening out there, not just with us, with all the other organisations who are doing this. I noticed today that good old Darren from Paisley YMC is running digital youth training as well. So there's so much out there, and we are doing our best at SCVO to get this information out. So not just about us, but as many organisations that are there. Third Force News has an events page. So if you have an event that you would like Third Force News to promote, if you, again, I'll find the link and put it up, you can just add that to the TFN event calendar, and it will then go on a map, and they will then tell the rest of our members what's happening and where it is. So please do use this to promote. We're all about the signposting at SCVO. We're a national body, so we can't possibly know what's going on locally. So if you do, tell us, and then we can get that out to other people. So just give us as much information, and then we can we'll find that out as widely as possible.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Maddie. I mean, you go on the events page, you'll get the listings for all these DigiShift calls. So the next one this week is Community Learning Development on Thursday. And then the week after that, we've got a really interesting one actually on the Tuesday. The focus is on data as a decision-making tool for charities. So we've got Steve McLaughlin, who's quite senior at Blackbaud over in the States. And he wrote the book Data-Driven Nonprofits. So if you've not read that book, it's an amazing introduction into using data as a decision-making tool in your charity. So he's going to be the kind of headline speaker. We've got someone from DataKind UK speaking as well. I'm trying to get someone from Data Lab. Hopefully we'll get someone from Data Lab along as well. So we've got 3 really good speakers for the data session. And then the Thursday after that is on mental health services moving to digital. So if you work in mental health services, that should be a really interesting one as well. First confirmed speaker is Chris O'Sullivan from the Mental Health Foundation. So he'll be speaking on that call. We've finished exactly on time. Amazing, this never happens. So thank you so much again to Ali and to Bruce. That was amazing, really, really insightful. The feedback's been great. Just if you look through the chat, just some amazing feedback from everyone. So thanks so much for taking the time for that today. It was really great. Thank you.